Hello, everyone. It's Blue Jay and JNT250 here, bringing you guys episode 37 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. We had an amazing weekend of games. It seems like pretty much every region had an amazing weekend of games. Maybe outside of LCK, but even I heard those games were even great as well, even though I didn't catch them. JNT, any initial thoughts on just the weekend as a whole?
Yeah, it always feels like, sometimes, you always think that like the best of fives sometimes happen outside of the finals, but it feels like at least for the LCS, the LEC, and who knows what is going on with the LPL. I mean, there's been some really great series, but the finals hasn't been played quite yet. But there have been some really good finals, and it always kind of does suck to see when the finals is way less hype than another best of five in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's true. That actually does happen a fair bit. And yeah, like you said, I don't think that happened this time around. We were really lucky, and it started making people ask, like, are these some of the best finals we've ever seen? And I think it's a worthy question, and we will dive into some of that later. Before we get into the LCS stuff, let's go international because MSI is approaching, and so let's do another update to MSI. What do we got going around in the other region?
Yeah, so if you were watching, the LEC right before the LCS, you would have seen the Rogue versus Mad Lions finals, which, if you didn't catch it, was a really great back and forth series. Went 5 games. Mad Lions got the reverse sweep to beat Rogue, and Rogue kind of had like a really big lead in game 5. I think they were up like 7K gold. Ended up throwing the lead. Mad Lions won. It was pretty sad for Rogue, honestly, because Otawamne has been pretty like outspoken and emotional about like this run that Rogue has been on and making finals finally, and to see them lose in that like reverse sweep fashion with throwing game 5, definitely like you got to feel bad for the guy.
They threw game 3 as well. Like, it was so sad. There was so much story like hyped up about Otawamne finally getting to finals, and then they were in the position to win. Like, oh my god, they had it, and they honestly they kind of just choked. I don't want to get too much into the games because again, like, we're gonna do that for LCS, and that's what we normally do. But oh my god, it was really sad. I will say the Mad Lions played well though. They were
Yeah.
getting outplayed in games 1 and 2, but they suddenly turned it on and they started to look a lot better. But yeah, I will also say that a lot of it was on Rogue not closing out the series that they could have closed out. I thought
Mm.
both junglers had great series. Even actually, I want to shout out Inspired a little bit more because even in the G2 series, that guy hard gapped Yankos, which is not something that we've said a lot in previous iterations of, well, ever for the LEC, right? So yeah, huge props to that guy. He looked really good. The thing is, it's weird because last week we talked about who would represent the LEC at MSI. And I remember saying this is this weird scenario where like the mathematical equation actually added up to who could maybe represent. Rogue was already in finals, so they were like a 50-50, right? Because
You
there's
mean
one
Mad
of two teams.
Lions?
So, what did I say, Rogue?
Yeah.
Yeah, I meant Mad Lions. And then obviously 25% each for G2 and for Rogue. And it did seem like when we watched the games, they were all pretty competitive. Yes, there was differences in which teams looked better, but you could see that any team could beat any team, and ultimately the team that had the higher chance of going actually ended up going, or
Yeah.
will go rather.
The thing about that, which is like kind of funny, I think, is like if you were to like poll people and like get people to predict who they thought would have won the LEC, the solid majority of people would have gone with either Rogue or with G2. And I think
Yeah.
like the community perception was that like Mad Lions isn't quite ready because their roster is so new. They have two, they're not necessarily rookies, but two very young players in Elioya and Armut. But they really stepped up.
Moot. I
That
love
guy's a
that
dude.
guy. He's great.
That guy's Wukong is pretty nuts. I wonder
Yeah.
if like, other regions are going to sort of, try the pick out, because I think we've seen that a lot this season, especially
Well, he
with.
played it last year too, right? He
Yeah, he
played it
did.
at
Yeah.
World. I think he played it at Worlds. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but like
Okay,
top
sorry.
lane carries were a little more meta at the time, and in this sort of
Yes.
age of like Renekton, Gnar, if not, you're playing like this scaling Gangplank, or you're going like the Omega tank with Sion or something like that. I think it was really cool to see him whip out the Wukong, and we've seen a ton of regions grabbing picks from other regions, and I wonder if we'll see the same, or what teams will have to answer that come MSI. Because the main thing for Mad Lions, which I'm actually excited about for MSI for them, is I feel like they're a much different team, and they'll have a much different story than their Worlds performance from 2020. I think, people like might think to that, like when they're talking about Mad Lions going to MSI and how they sort of failed in Worlds 2020. But the main thing with this Mad Lions roster, I think they're a lot more balanced. Previous Mad Lions was all about bot lane, and it was only about bot lane. And I feel like this iteration of Mad Lions, Humanoid is playing really well. Carzzy and Kaiser, while they're not, I think, as insane as they were last year, are still very, very solid. And as you're just talking about Armut, that guy can whip out the carry and carry the game.
Yeah, he definitely can. And to your point that, like, yeah, people were playing some carries in the top lane during Worlds, I think the main point that you basically hit on is that Armut's the one that hung on to the Wukong. Like, he's still playing it, and
Mhm.
most other top laners are not at the moment, which is pretty cool. And yes, I think the bot lane got outplayed, honestly. Mad Lions got
Yeah.
outplayed in the Rogue series, pretty much every series. I really felt bad for Ansama. He had a great series. That
Mhm.
guy looks really good. Um, it happens, you know. Sometimes things don't go your way. Sometimes you are the better team. Sometimes you're the better player, and you just don't move on. That's life. But anyways, yeah, really, really good stuff. I highly recommend people keep up with the LEC squad, or rather the Mad Lions squad, to rep LEC at MSI, because they're a lot of fun to watch. Like, pretty much the three top teams that we saw play this weekend in the LEC, they're all really fun teams to watch, and so
Mhm.
I highly recommend keeping up with them. What else did we have? We had Damwon beat Gen G, right?
Yep.
I wanted to watch this series. I planned to watch this series, and then Twitter kind of spoiled it for me. It's my fault. I shouldn't check Twitter, but I did, and I saw it was a 3-0, and I really wanted Gen G to win. I really like Gen G. I'm a big BDD fan, and so I couldn't bring myself to watch it, especially with I just had other stuff to watch, like LEC and LCS. So, but yeah, I guess Damwon really clapped them, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, the gist of it is Damwon is just as good as they were at Worlds when they won. And that, I
Yeah,
think, is going to be the narrative going into MSI, is who's going to be able to take down Damwon, because we'll get to it in a little bit. While some teams in the LPL are looking really good, uh, Damwon is still the team to beat.
Yeah, I've followed the LCK pretty much all spring, or for most of spring, let's say. So I'm not surprised that Damwon is there. Like, guys, if you guys watch Damwon, you will see a team that absolutely dominates. But Gen G also had a really good split as well, and so I thought that there was a chance this series was competitive. Apparently, Gen G did have a lead in one of the games, or they kind of threw their lead, or so I hear. But regardless, a 3-0 is usually pretty convincing. Not always, but usually.
Mhm.
So, I mean, yeah, you've got the best team in the LCK going, that's for sure.
Yeah, last up we got LPL. They have not yet concluded. FPX, Season 9 World Champions, they've already advanced to the finals, and the finals is actually on Sunday at 5 a.m. EST. I honestly might consider watching that match just because of how hype the rest of the LPL playoffs has been. If you haven't been following, watching any highlights, or even know what's going on, basically, there's been a ton of great best of fives in this whole tournament, from Suning, like Top Esports, the FPX EDG series, lot of bangers. And the other remaining series is RNG versus EDG in the lower bracket finals, which is actually tonight at 5 a.m. So if you're staying up and going the distance, that series will definitely be a good series. Winner faces FPX, and I have no doubt that the LPL finals is going to be great.
Yeah, it should be pretty exciting. So yeah, pretty much all the regions are either finished or almost finished, with the LPL being the last one of the major regions. That is, I'm actually not sure about the minor regions, but we do know what the group is going to look for, like for Cloud9 that will be repping us. So go ahead and share what the group is going to look like there, JNT.
Yeah, so at least for the LCS group, they're in Group C at MSI, and all their teams in that group have already been decided, meaning those regions have concluded. So in that group, Group C, we have LCK, which is Damwon. The LCS is Cloud9. The LLA, which is the Latin American League, is Infinity Esports, and the LJL, which is the Japanese League, is Detonation Focus Me. One thing just that's a little bit interesting, is both Infinity Esports and Detonation Focus Me were at Season 8 Worlds, where Cloud9 qualified through the play-in tournament, and Cloud9 actually played Detonation Focus Me in group stages of that play-in tournament. Had some really close games, if I remember correctly. One was like a big comeback win that Cloud9 had with Licorice playing Lissandra top lane. Yeah, I mean, these are two teams that have had a little bit of history in the past with C9 and Detonation Focus Me, and kind of another known and what's like a big fan base team from the Latin American League in Infinity Esports.
Yeah, it's like there's a history with some of these teams, but I think most people would agree that it's hard for that to carry over. Like, there's first of all, there's no real rivalry because they barely ever play each other anyways. Like, they just play each other once at at Worlds, and then like it's been 3 years now,
Oh, I'm
three
just saying,
years,
we've seen a
and it's
little bit. We got a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
glimpse.
There's a little bit of a history there. But anyways, yeah, it's C9. They got to go up against Damwon. I think, regardless of whether they get clapped or not, I think it's so good that C9 gets to go up against what people are thinking. It's hard to say, but what people are thinking is probably the best team in the world right now.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Let's get into LCS now, because LCS was absolutely hyped this weekend. Let's talk about the setup and whatnot. So first of all, they were outside and they were on stage, and that was cool. And Pentakill did a little performance. What are your thoughts on that stuff?
To be honest, I didn't even really watch the Pentakill performance. I watched just in preparation for this, just like a couple minutes of it, just because I wanted to see what it was about. And from what I saw, and from what the whole like community perception of it was, is that it was good. Like, it wasn't something that detracted from the whole like culmination of finals. I didn't think that, we won't get into it, but previous finals performances where they do like a big musical thing at the start can sometimes detract from it. In this case, I didn't think it did that. It was also kind of like cool how Pentakill, they've already had a lot of involvement in League of Legends because they do a lot of League of Legends music that plays like in between games and whatnot. And I thought it was pretty good overall.
Yeah, so it's not that it was bad, it's that it just feels so bad seeing them do a performance without a live audience. And like, that, first of all, they play Pentakill music in between games all the time. Like, this is like very normal for the LCS, so I'm sure there would have been a lot of people that would have appreciated being there in person for a live show. Like, oh, I actually know these songs. I can actually, like, when you know a song at a concert, you enjoy it way more than if you don't know the songs. So that kind of sucks. And then they showed like the players standing there with like their arms crossed as they're just sitting there watching Pentakill. It was a little bit awkward. But again, I think they did just about as good as they can without having people there. I still thought that it was good, and I think that I hope that they do it again. I hope that once COVID is done, we get an opportunity to see them do it again and make it a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly. It just feels a bit awkward when like the whole point of like a live performance is like part of that is like you get like the crowd involvement and you hear the crowd noise in the background, and like it kind of like brings the whole thing together and make it feel like an actual performance. But it kind of didn't really do that. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I just thought the performance was pretty good. Like,
yeah, and someone in chat puts it really, really good. They just put the empty stage was off-putting, but the band was great. That's a good way of putting it, I would say. That's pretty accurate. But what about the actual player stage? Because Zen had some choice words to say about that. He wasn't too impressed with the stage. He said that it was cold. He said that he always needed hand warmers. I believe he said on cooldown.
yeah, he did.
And then there was the sunlight that happened for tactical screen. There was some things that weren't so great, and you thought, or at least I thought, that they would have fixed those things beforehand. If you have an outdoor venue, my first thought is sunlight. How is that going to be a problem, and how can you fix it? I'm really surprised that they made that whole little stage thing, and somehow the sunlight still got through, and then there was a huge pause, right?
Yeah,
I
that
don't know if they were waiting for the sun to go down, or if they couldn't wait, or if they couldn't find something to block the sun. It was just kind of like, for such a good series, it sucks to have to put that on pause, right?
yeah, like to your point exactly, like I feel like if you're going to have your whole setup outside, that's something that you definitely need to prepare for. Although it kind of seemed like and maybe they didn't envision it, or the sun just hit at one point at this exact angle where it like peaked in, because from what they said on the broadcast and from what was understood, it was just like on one corner of tactical screen. And it was a little bit weird that they kind of just couldn't like put something up to block it, because I did think that it sort of took the momentum out of the series a little bit, because at the time, like, that was in game 4, right after TL had just won game 3, and like they're one game away from closing out the finals. And you would have to assume like the team in the winning position has got to be a little bit cheesed, just because like it's a bit off-putting.
Well, and you know what's weird is that you and we've experienced this before because for those of you guys that don't know, JNT and I were in an esports program in college, and that's how we met. But um, we had an esports arena, and there was always sunlight issues, always. And so we used to put up like shoe boxes and
Yeah.
do like we used to do all this ridiculous stuff. Sometimes you would like I remember like trying to like stand in a certain spot so if someone's playing I could like block like just ridiculous things with like, and so maybe that's why you and I are so aware of like the sun being an issue. Maybe that's why like the first thing we think of is what's the sun going to do, because even when we were indoors it was an issue. But
Yeah.
anyway,
We know
I
all about that.
digress. Yeah, it's such a weird thing. Also, he said the stage was shaking, I think he said too. That was another weird thing. That's, you don't want to feel any sensation of like being shook around as you're trying to focus on what could be split second decisions. That's just another little thing. He said, I actually think that he said it was like a failed experiment. I wouldn't go as far to say that, but again, I'm not playing, right? So if the players think it's that bad, well, maybe it's that bad.
Yeah, the other thing that people kind of had opinions on was the whole analyst desk setup. How they basically had the analyst desk, if you want to call it a desk, because there was no desk. They were basically like propped up on this little stage in front of all the monitors that they had, displaying player portraits and team logos and whatnot. And that was, again, it was a little bit weird to me, like that whole vibe. I've kind of been vocal that I think the whole setup that people have been running, where like people are like equally spaced 6 feet apart, just looks weird. Yes, you're not going to have everything as you want it to be because of like your COVID restrictions, but at some point it just felt like the whole thing was awkward a little bit.
It was awkward, but I will say I still give so much credit to the LCS for going out of their way to do the best with what they can. Like, this is not an easy scenario, guys. And yes, like, we're talking about all the bad things because they were evident, but that doesn't mean we necessarily blame the LCS. Like, oh, how could you? Like, yes, it was awkward, but I really appreciate what they did to try to make it in person. And at the end of the day, it all made it better once I saw Sven running for the trophy at the end. Like, having them all in person was so much better. Like, when's the last time we saw people get that excited for spring's finals? You know what I mean? Like, spring has not been as hype as summer for quite some time now. And seeing Sven and Perks get down to that trophy, like, they were actually happy to win, which is like, I mean, they've done it a million times, so I wasn't really expecting that.
Yeah,
So
they were kind of memeing a little bit, like both when they were entering the stage before game 1 and then leaving the stage after game 5, like waving to like the crowd, the non-existent crowd, basically. So I
yeah,
thought that was pretty funny how they were memeing a little bit.
yeah,
But yeah, exactly like you said, we are focusing on the negatives a little bit here, but for the most part, like it was good to see one, the LCS back like physically in person. It was at like a location. They're back. The casters were back in the studio. That was one thing that I thought was really, really great, which was a bit weird earlier in playoffs, was that the casters weren't actually back in the studio. It was only Dash in the studio. I think having the casters in the studio really helped. I really
the
like
conversation between analysts was so much better. Like,
for sure.
it was very, very good.
Yeah, and I like the whole setup that they have in the studio for the casters with the screens behind them and whatnot. I think that looks really good.
Yeah. Yeah, all this to say, like, I was so happy with how the LCS went this weekend. It was actually ridiculously nice to see them get out of their own apartments trying to do, remote broadcasts and all that stuff. It was really, really good. Even with the things that were kind of bean soup, as we like to call it.
hmm
But anyways, let's talk about the series, right?
Well,
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
before the series
Go
got
for it.
announced on Friday that Blabber won the
Ooh.
LCS MVP. I think we both, no, just myself predicted that. I thought Alfari would win MVP. You predicted Blabber, if I remember that
Hold
correctly.
on,
Is that
because
right?
I predicted that Alfari would win, but my vote would have been Blabber, if that
Oh,
makes sense. You know,
okay.
I thought more people were going to go with Alfari. I really did, but me personally, I thought that the impact that Blabber had earlier on the split was just too good. Yeah, he had a little bit of a speed bump, we'll call it, towards the end, but he was so good,
hmm
so good. And there were some times, even though it was rare, there were some matchups where Alfari did get outplayed, and I know it's weird to say because he pretty much smashed everyone for most of the season. It's like a really nitpicky thing, but Either way, I wasn't going to be upset. I think either one of them could have won it, and I would have been like, deserved.
Yeah, exactly. I thought, my prediction was Alfari. But like I said, I thought that it was basically like a 55-45 kind of situation. It was like, yeah, it was honestly just a pick 'em.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people were pretty upset, but I mean, that's normal.
Yeah.
That always happens. Okay, let's get into TLTSM. This series, not as good as the next one. I mean, it was fun to watch, I'll say that. It wasn't very well played. Do you want to start us off with this one, or should I?
I mean, you can go ahead. Like,
Okay. I'm gonna be flaming TSM a lot this episode. It's not that I want to, but it's like I can't ignore it. They do nothing. They do nothing, and I can't believe that that's still happening. I talked about this on Hotline. I thought they looked good in their last series against TL, the first one at the start of playoffs, and since then they do nothing, man. They are always the team to react, and I can't believe that that's still happening. Sometimes you have comps that you play slow and you play for late. No problem there. But game 2, when you are up 2 kills in the bot lane, you get a double kill on your Tristana. You have a Lucian mid into Annie. Like, you have Prio. Someone, whether it's Spica, whether it's Lost, whether it's Sword Art, someone called to go Dragon. They didn't go until 14 minutes. That is so bad. And if it didn't, it ended up hurting them so much more later, which is why it's really bothering me so much, is because they were 3 minutes off of Soul Point later when they ended up throwing and getting caught. And what their first time that they ended up throwing, because by the way, they threw multiple times. They had 3 minutes to go until they would have had Soul Point. And I know that they should have had their first drag before 11 minutes, right? They went until 14 minutes, that the difference is 3 minutes. Basically, what I'm saying is they would have had Soul if they played for Dragon earlier, which they definitely could have. I rewatched that game and I'm looking at it going, I still can't see why they're not going for Dragon here. TL would never want to contest Dragon that early. They're so far behind bot lane. Your bot lane smashes them that TL would probably just give it up. Or if they do contest, perfect. You've got a team fight that you're probably going to win because you're ahead. And they don't go drag. I'm sure people can tell how tilted I was from that specifically. That game they should have won. They should have had Ocean Soul, which, mind you, maybe isn't the greatest soul, but you should win that game. And oh my God, did they throw that one hard.
yeah, I mean, it's not even like their bot lane was just ahead. Like, mid lane was also really ahead. Sword Art had a really nice roam mid lane where he hit the flash body slam over the wall, getting to that was disgusting. Like, the game kind of seemed like it was blown wide open off of that play. And like you just mentioned, they're not stacking their dragons early enough. I think the main thing we're seeing out of specifically Cloud9 and the way that they utilize their early game drafts, they were really successful with it in their first series against TSM. They had sort of the first game in this finals against TL. They did a really great job there in their early game. But the whole point of picking these early game comps, when you're taking an aggressive ADC, when you're taking an aggressive mid laner like a Lucian, like a Tristana, the whole point is to get advantages through lane, transition those laning advantages into first drag, first herald, and just naturally accrue an early gold lead, and then use that gold lead to continually stack your dragons until you get to that fourth Drake. Because in those kind of team comps where one team is picking early game, the other team is picking scaling, the scaling comp usually chooses to fight on that fourth Drake. And like you just mentioned, TSM Soul was just so delayed because they took so long to get that first Drake that TL had pretty much gotten the necessary time to get back into the game. And it was really crazy that they ended up losing that game. I would definitely say part of it was, exactly as you mentioned, the dragon stacking. But the other part was TSM just couldn't figure out how to team fight against this comp. I think looking back on the games, the biggest mistake from TSM was when they were posturing for objective control, whether that was getting Baron Vision, getting Dragon Vision, taking towers, anything like that, they had Huni cross-mapping with TP available. But the thing you got to realize is Team Liquid has a Nocturne. They shut off the lights, you can't TP. And in those two major team fights where the game really turned, which was the team fight around top lane tier 2 tower, and the team fight in TL's red side jungle where Core JJ jumps over that red buff wall, was Huni was on the opposite side of the map with TP up, split pushing, and he can't join the fight because Nocturne shuts the lights off.
The lights go out, and yeah, you can't see. Yeah, that's exactly it. But I will say, the one throw where it was the top lane fight. I don't know if you remember which one I'm talking about, but that was started up by TSM. It was started up by PoE. Like I said, I rewatched this series
Yeah, he
because I
dashed
was
in
so
and threw
much.
an ulti at people.
He uses his E as Lucian. He's playing Lucian. He E's in. He uses his Gale Force in to pick off a Rel. Core JJ just turns around and goes, okay, and just engages, and then Nocturne comes in, and the wombo happens. Annie teleports in, obviously, like you mentioned. Huni can't join because the lights are off, and they just, well, I don't know if they completely wiped. I think they lost 4. They lost 3 or 4. It was like a 3
I
or
think
4 for O.
it was 3, I think.
And a bunch of shutdowns go the way of Team Liquid. I think they were down like 7K, and I think maybe might have been 8K, and afterwards they were down only like 3K after that play from all the shut, and then Baron, and it was actually they might not even have Baron on that play. I can't remember, but anyways, it was an absolute nightmare. And we talked before about whether PoE is good at playing non-control mages. That's been his criticism, and that was a problem right there. You should know that to not overextend and use all of your gap closers to gap close into a rel that will just turn on you and kill you. That's pretty obvious. And I'm a huge PoE fan, so I was a little disappointed in that as well, to be frank.
Yeah, the other thing to really talk about in that game too was the Annie pick.
We got the Annie.
I'll give credit where it's due. Our boy Ren Zero was
Ren, where are you?
He was basically like, he kind of predicted it, that like he thought TL was gonna whip out the Annie, and I was basically saying like there's no way that they actually whip out Annie in the match before finals or in finals, because I just didn't think Annie was that great a pick. And according to Team Liquid, they thought it was a very good pick. But just to sort of talk about it a little bit, one thing I thought was just like kind of weird in general is specifically into the Lucian. Like Lucian is like a champion that's supposed to win lane. Like that just naturally happens. You're playing an ADC mid. You're going to get a natural advantage with your ability to push waves. You're going to go up in CS. You might get some tower plates, and that kind of leads to your dragons, like we were just talking about. But the main thing that I thought was weird is like Annie doesn't scale as well as like your typical control mages. In that draft, both Victor and Ryze were up, I think, 2 way better options than Annie in that spot. And if you go and take a look at this game, like watch Jensen's Annie. He legitimately does nothing the entire game. Even in the team fights at TL1, he did nothing. The Annie did absolutely nothing. He missed his flash ult twice. All he was basically doing was queuing in team fights, and the only time he actually hit an ult was in the game-ending team fight where TL had already mounted the comeback. You knew TSM was kind of out of it, and then he does hit a nice flash ult at the end. But honestly, go take a look at that game again. Jensen's Annie actually did nothing, which is why I thought the Annie pick in general was super weird, because I feel like a lot of other control mages just provide a lot more value in that game.
So I agree. I'm going to play devil's advocate, though. But I do agree with you, because I think the Ryze is a perfect example of something that scales well and can do a lot in team fights. When the lights are off, you kind of want to burst, and you have a rel, right? So you can kind of group them up, and so the Tibbers can actually do both of those things. You've got AoE, burst.
Well, to that, I would just say pick Victor. You E and then you drop the ulti down.
Hold on. Let me finish, because I still think Ryze can do both of those things as well. He's got AoE and he does burst damage. What was my point? I lost my point. I was talking about the rel.
Annie, burst, turn the lights off.
I had a point, but if it comes back to me, I'll get to it. But anyways, yes, it's because Lucian is actually quite slippery, right? Like Lucian is a champion that is dashing around all over the place. That's pretty common, and so you could argue point and click CC with Annie would be great, and not so much Victor. But again, Ryze does the same thing. So that's where I agree with you. Like I said, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I think that the Ryze is just a better pick, but I can see why the Annie is good there. I just think Ryze is better. That's the only thing.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I agree with your point. I think Annie is a little bit better than your typical control mages in terms of like shutting down a slippery target,
locking them down and bursting, right?
I would say that like Ryze also does fill that need, and
absolutely
the way that it plays out is Lucian uses his cleanse on any stun, and Lucian would use his cleanse on like a Ryze EW. Yeah, but the Annie pick just seems super useless in general. I think it's a weaker laner than what you could have gotten out of like a Ryze or a Victor. It doesn't scale as well as champions like Ryze or Victor, and I'm saying those two champions specifically because they're champions in the meta, and they're champions that were available in that draft.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
totally
mean,
fair.
even if you think that like the Annie was useful and you're like, oh, he did something, like, dude, go look at the game. He did absolutely nothing the whole game, minus the last team fight. And it was weird to see because Team Liquid like said afterwards, like they thought Annie was a really good pick. And even I was watching I watched the highlights of the LS co-stream, and he was saying apparently this one Korean player that he talks to says that Annie is actually pretty good into Lucian. Which, I don't know, it just didn't seem like it played out like that. Maybe they played the matchup
The thing
like...
is, they were so far behind bot lane, and
Yeah.
that's kind of swung the like. Remember how we talked about how Sword Art ended up going mid and just diving them? That's something that happens because bot lane is so far ahead, and they can get prio and roam freely, right?
Yeah.
Mind you, there are roaming supports now, regardless. But yeah, just again, that I wouldn't say this game, them falling behind, had anything to do with the Annie as much as it did their bot lane getting 2-0'd very early on.
Yeah.
Hello again, everyone. Seems like we had some issues last night with internet. This is going to sound really weird for audio listeners, but we had a disconnect last night and couldn't finish our episode. So we have internet again, and we're going to pick up right where we left off. I believe we left off talking about TSM, and I think we were talking about TSM TL, rather, and we were talking about the Annie pick. And we had just finished talking about that. And then we went to shout out someone who subbed, and that's when we lost internet. So shout out to BNT250, JNT's clone, who subbed last night. And let's get right back into things. So I don't believe we talked yet about Alfari, who actually got player of the series. Did you have any thoughts on Alfari in this series?
Yeah, I thought he had a pretty good series for the most part. It didn't feel like to me that there was like a real standout player on Team Liquid that like pushed them over the top, because I thought everyone on Team Liquid was playing really well. I mentioned in that game too, like TL did a really great job just climbing themselves back into the game through some great team fighting. Core JJ was doing a great job. Alfari was doing a great job. Armea was doing a great job in that game on the Nocturne. I was previously talking about how he was, denying Hooney's TP, and that I think that Team Liquid was doing a great job of playing around the fact that Hooney's on the opposite side of the map. If they use the Nocturne ult, Hooney can't join. So overall, I thought, everyone in that series on Team Liquid played well. But I did think Alfari was deserving of it. I'm not going to argue against it. He seems to have, I wouldn't say shifted his play style, but with what the meta is wanting, he's playing a lot more tanks, which is interesting. Not to say that I don't think he's as good on tanks as he is carries or, frontline engagers, but it definitely feels like most of Alfari's value is when he's able to play something aggressive in lane and not just your beefy tank in Sion.
And I think most people would agree with you. When we were watching, so you and I were watching the Meteos Doublelift Sneaky co-stream, and I believe one of them said something along the lines of what you just said. And I think we agree. However, I think you and I would also both agree that when it comes time to play internationally, so yes, they're not going to MSI, sure, but they do have a very good chance of going to Worlds. You need to bring a lot more than just 3 picks, right? And so I think that that's something you need to build up as the year goes on. And so I think it's great that they're having him play picks like the Sion. You could argue whether you want to see him play it in a finals or not. You think he's the most clutch player. I don't mind that argument, but I do think that it's good that he's diversifying. And we did see that he looked good on Sion as well. And then there was the talk about his win rate on champions that weren't GP, NAR, and one more. I'm forgetting.
Gangplank.
I said GP.
Oh, Renekton.
Yes, Renekton. And I guess his win rate on other champions were about 11% since the start of lock-in, which was really surprising. To me, that doesn't speak to him being bad on tanks or anything like that. To me, it speaks more to TL needing to adapt to different play styles. And like I said, I think they will do that by the time Worlds comes around. And we even saw him on the Sion. I mean, mind you, Game 4 was an absolute smash, right? Game 4 was... But we saw him walk up to the Jinx and just solo kill a Jinx. And that was like, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes into the game, maybe 15. Like, yeah, he was just absolutely dominating on the Sion as well. And he looked good in just about every lane. So definitely worthy of the MVP vote, or of that series, rather, in my opinion.
Yeah, he had like a 3-level advantage when he just ran down Lost in the bot lane. Like, Lost was pushing a tier 1 tower. Alfari just TP'd behind him and just auto-attacked him to death as Sion, pretty much.
And part of that is not a product of Lost being bad or Alfari being good. A huge part of that is that it was a smash. The kills in that game ended up being 19-0. It was an absolute stomp game 4, and that's how the series ended up closing out, which is like that to me was actually fitting because we talk about how sometimes there's a 3-0 series that's really close, or there's a 5-game series that's kind of a stomp. This was one, it was a 4-game series, but I believe it was still a stomp. Even the game TSM won, I thought it was more TL trying to make plays, but just kind of trolling. If I could give some flashbacks to Jensen with some of his TP plays, mind you, they won that game. It was game 1, but Jensen's TP flank on Victor was ridiculously troll. And he like turned, I can't even explain it properly, but basically he inted again, walking into melee range of Renekton in that same game. Basically, what I'm trying to say was a lot of the advantages that TSM got throughout the series were TL just kind of flunking on certain plays. And I know it sounds like I'm just hating on TSM, but look, guys, if you watch that series, there is not a lot TSM was doing that was proactive. And I think I mentioned this last night when we started the recording, but yeah, it was not good.
The one thing that I will give TSM some credit, because they seem to do this quite often, a lot, even during the spring split this year, was finding like sneaky barons. They had in that game 3 a really like sneaky, I think it was like 22-minute baron where they had Orianna and Udyr two-manning the baron for the majority of the time, and they had their bot lane showing on the mid wave, and then bot lane later rotates and they finish the baron. And while you look at it from the viewer perspective, and if you're like watching on a co-stream and you have like the fog of war and that like they're hitting baron, so how you think to yourself, how does TL not know that they're doing this? But I actually thought it was pretty smart by TSM that they had Orianna Udyr two-manning the baron with their bot lane showing on the wave, because in all likely scenario, like, you're not thinking that they're starting baron when they have two of their champions showing on the mid wave. So I thought that was pretty good by TSM. It's not something I really fault TL for, because I didn't think that they were expected to go for that. And especially, once they realized that they were on Baron, because their bot lane did rotate over to Baron, the Baron was like literally already 4k HP. Like, I don't think anybody's expecting Orianna Udyr to be like one-shotting Baron taking 0 damage.
So normally I would agree with you. However, like I said, I did go back and rewatch that series. There was a blue trinket that was already on the Baron, or maybe it was a regular ward. Someone could correct me on that, but there was already a ward on Baron from TL. TSM goes and puts a pink ward there, clears the ward, and then just starts up the Baron right away. And then there's still 2 other blue trinkets available to the mid, to Jensen and Tactical, both of them in range of Baron. So to me, that is very much like Team Liquid. You got to know that they're on Baron, or even if you don't know, that's what you buy the blue trinkets for. You have to check that. But with that said, I do agree with you that you do need to give credit when teams go for these plays, because I don't think that that's a huge risk play from TSM side of things, seeing as there wasn't much else to do on the map at the time. And you are looking to get, like, sometimes going for that sneak play is a good play. And for TSM, it clearly worked out there. And so you have to give props. It's like, you give props to the team for making the play, but you're also a little disappointed for the enemy team for letting it happen. That's the kind of way I look at that one.
Yeah. Yeah, just the last thing to close out in the series for me, you kind of mentioned it already, but in game 4, like, in my opinion, like, TL just got the God draft. They got their Senatom Kench, they got their tank top laner, they got their tank engaged jungler, and they got a damage threat mid lane. And in my opinion, I think that's Team Liquid's best draft. And I think in any game where they get that draft, I would vote for TL pretty much regardless of who they're playing, unless it's like some insane team in a different region. But I think that comp is TL's best comp by far. It gives like Tactical the safety to just like play with his dick out and just like hit people repeatedly on Senna. You just have your unkillable front line and Sion plus Tom Kench, and then you just have your damage threat in the mid lane. And that's one comp that I think that TL is really good at running, similar to how Cloud9 is really good at running the early game team comp. So yeah, game 4, just a straight up stomp fest.
Yeah, it definitely was. And my last point will be, I actually want to talk a little bit more about Core JJ, because we give him lots of praise, and deservedly so. But I noticed that he was actually getting caught out quite a bit in this series. And it reminded me of, LEC fans will know exactly what I'm talking about. It reminded me of Hylissang. You know how Hylissang can have a huge impact for his team. He finds a lot of picks. He's always getting vision, but a lot of times he's going out by himself to get that vision and ends up getting picked and giving away advantages. That's actually something we saw quite a bit out of Core JJ in that series. And so if we're going to praise him for all the good stuff he does, I do think we need to be critical about when he's overstepping rather, And I think that we did see him overstep a fair bit in that series as well. And TSM, to their credit, you need to be able to punish those things when you recognize someone making a mistake. And so it's not like it wasn't the worst. Like I said, TSM didn't look good, but it wasn't the worst series. They were still punishing some of the mistakes TL was making, and so got to give some credit there. And yeah, that's about it for me.
Yeah, I think we'll move on now to the finals. Pretty epic finals, if I do say so.
Unbelievable series, guys. This was holy crap, man. This was a good series. Despite a couple of pauses in between games, this was hella hype. And my initial thoughts were this series felt ridiculously more hype than the exact same series we saw last year. And by series, I mean finals, right? It, flashback to Cloud9 versus FlyQuest last year, it it almost felt like it didn't even matter.
Yeah,
And I don't think I don't know if we knew MSI was canceled at the time or not. I don't remember.
don't think
But
it
if
was.
I don't think it was either. And so you would think that teams would be really hungry for that win last year, but it's just like everyone knew Cloud9 was going to win because they were so far and away the best team at that time. And it didn't feel like that was the case for this series. It really did feel like it could go either way. And it went to game 5. And I think that's why this series was so good. There was a bunch of the games that even started off slow that you thought would be boring ended up being bloodbaths by the end. They were just really really good games. I don't care what game you want to start with or what player, what lane, wherever you want to start, I'm good because it was great top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean, we can just start from the game one. The first game was like people thought we were going to kind of see a repeat of the previous series because Cloud9 went pretty all in with this early game composition that they ran against Team Liquid before with the Renekton top lane and with the Kalista Alistar bot lane. Pretty much, you kind of know what you're getting with this draft. Cloud9 is going to try to get ahead. They're going to try to stack dragons, and if they do so, it's up to them to close out the game and win the game. And a couple of missteps in the mid game kind of led to, you know, Cloud9, the game sort of getting in an even state, and then you could really see the Team Liquid comp sort of get online with the Victor and with the Xayah and just dealing a fuck ton of damage.
Yeah, and I want to know, how do you feel about that kind of draft, that early game we're going to smash you draft? Because there are a lot of different feelings with this one. I personally, I think it's more than fine. If you're confident that you can win and smash the early game, I think it's more than fine to run this comp. We've seen them run something similar the last time they played TL, and things were going just the same in this series. They were absolutely smashing them until Blabber went a little too ham, and they kind of ended up throwing. So that's where the criticism comes in, right? Even if you have this great early game, one little slip up can cost you the game, and that's what ended up happening in this one. So what are your thoughts, J&T, on C9 going for this kind of early game we're going to smash you draft?
Well, I mean, I think it's a good draft until you can't execute on it. We saw it in the Team Liquid series prior 1 week ago. Cloud9 was really good at this kind of draft, and I don't fault them at all for going for this exact same thing in game one, and they got those same advantages in the first 15 minutes of the game. But like you mentioned, kind of one mistake and it can kind of all fall apart. We saw that with Blabber going a little bit too ham, like a flash bear slap on a Hecarim, which kind of left him out of position. Core JJ in return like jumped on him with the Rel combo, and then the game basically went even. And I think Cloud9 still did a really great job keeping themselves in the game. I think with those two drafts, they have no business, taking that game to, what was it, like 47 minutes?
Around 40 something. Yeah. It was a long game. It was the longest one of the series.
Yeah, it was 48 minutes. But like, I mean, if you look at those two drafts, like Cloud9 has no business being in that draft, but I think they had some really great team fighting. Perks' Seraphine was really insane. He was getting multi-man ults pretty much all the time. Fudge was doing a great job of finding flanks and diving the backline, and it kind of felt like when those team fights were falling apart for Cloud9, it was when they couldn't get those coordinated engages with Fudge on the backline, or he'd be coming in too late, or he would get chunked out before he goes in. And you basically saw in that game, the only way Cloud9 was able to stay in it and even win the game was to play perfect. And anytime that they couldn't do that is when you just saw TL's comp overpower them.
Well, and I will even say that despite, I don't even know if I want to say falling behind, but let's say despite losing their lead, they actually had another opportunity to end later where they got that ace and they decided to go for the end rather than go for Baron. This was something that I don't think when you're in game it's a very obvious play. I think this is a very hindsight take that I'm about to give, but I do think that it's still accurate. I think there you have to go for the Baron because I do believe that you are able to siege with a Baron buff with that kind of comp that you have. So
Holy
I
Jesus.
honestly, what's up?
Sorry, there's just a loud noise in my ear.
Oh, okay. So, anyways, I do think that they actually made the wrong call in trying to force the end there. Again, that's very hindsight, guys. That is not an easy play to make in the moment. But all this to say that they actually had another opportunity to close out the game. And so, even though they didn't close it out early, which they probably should have, they had another chance later. They made a mistake on the macro call and ended up dying later when they tried to go back to Baron. But that's League of Legends. Sometimes you got to make split second decisions, right?
I mean,
Um,
my thoughts on that specifically is I feel like in the position that they were in, being that they had kind of fallen behind for most of the game at this point, and that they have the weaker late game draft in comparison to Team Liquid, I don't fault them at all for going for that end because I think that's a perfectly fine play. But I do think if you were in the reverse position and you have Team Liquid, who is this like super late game team comp and doesn't need to go for these like risks, I think in that case, the safer play and probably the correct play is to go back, take the Baron, reassess, and then, do your like 4-1ing and, crash the base like that. But I think in the
yeah.
position that Cloud9 was in with the weaker draft, they were behind for most of the game up to this point. I think it was totally fine to go for that.
Yeah, again, it's not an easy call, so I'm okay on either side of that argument, I suppose. Let's talk about top lane though, because we talked for not even just last week, we talked for months about how in the TLC9 matchup, it's whether he can hold his own, whether Fudge can hold his own against Alfari. And oh my god, did we see that completely swap, right? It seemed like Alfari was having trouble holding his own against Fudge, and not so much that Fudge was smashing the lane, he was getting a lot of jungle attention, but clearly he was setting up waves and using wave management to get his advantages against Alfari. And yes, you have to give credit to Blabber as well, taking creative paths to get to top lane. But my god, did they smash through top lane? Every single kill in that game was in the top lane. Mind you, in game one, first blood was on Armeo, but every other game, First Blood was on Alfari, and he was getting absolutely stomped up there. And so, huge credit to Fudge and Blabber for finding ways to play around what we all had consensus the best top laner in the league.
Yeah, it was pretty much the same game plan from Cloud9 in the previous series into this series. We saw a lot of attention towards topside. We saw a lot of, good wave management out of Fudge in terms of having the lane either on his side, frozen on his side, or crashing waves in and then punishing Alfari. Like you mentioned, Alfari got first blooded in 4 out of the 5 games this series. There was like that meme going around where, everyone kept saying all 5 games, but people kind of forgot that it was actually Armeo who died in that first game 1. But the main thing was like it just seems that Fudge is like gaining so much more confidence and just has so much more confidence than he did prior in the
And why
lock-in
wouldn't
tournament.
you, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
he's looking great.
Yeah, in the lock-in tournament, there were some clear problems with Fudge, and I think people were pretty quick to just like bash him and say, "Oh, does Cloud don't even think to like potentially find a substitute or like what are their alternative options?" And I was
I mean,
one to
I was on that train.
yeah.
Absolutely. He looked awful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that he didn't look bad, but I was never one to like jump on the bandwagon of like Cloud needs to start reassessing their options because, I think it was known that, not known, but it was assumed that Fudge was going to have time to be able to improve. Everyone recognizes that he's still a very young player, and like we mentioned early on in the season, like he's probably in the best situation possible for improving and becoming a better player, and I think that's really what we're seeing. You know,
See, my take on that though is I still stand by what I said before. If you have a player that's struggling that much and you've sunk $5 million, is the rumor that they sunk in just to acquiring perks, you've spent so much money on this roster that you can't afford to have a liability in the top lane. To be clear, my exact take was C9 needs to assess what their backup plan is because right now, or at the time rather, you had a player who could not hold his own. It was very clear that he was a liability, but I did also say, and I quote, that he is in the best scenario, like you just said. That's something I said. He's in the best scenario to improve. And so it's not that I thought they should give up on him, but there's never anything wrong with exploring what your options are if something doesn't work out. And I still think that absolutely Cloud9 was in that scenario. But oh my God, has Fudge turned things around? And yes, he's looked really, really good. And he's clearly proving that he deserves that spot. And not only does he deserve to be there, he's looking great with every opportunity he gets. Every game he's getting better.
Yeah, I just thought it was funny because a freak like retweeted his top lane tier list after the
Yes.
finals and was like, "Look at me now" or something like that. So I thought it was pretty funny. Like, obviously, you know, that was his opinion back then, and I think the majority of people would have disagreed with him that Fudge was like a bottom half top laner, and I would agree he was a bottom half top laner at that time. You know, who knows? Freak was maybe going for like, you know, where top laners would
The
be
long
trending,
haul.
like the long haul, or like, you don't know. But I just thought that was funny, and I think rightfully so. I would say Fudge is top 3 right now. You could argue
No
top
doubt.
2.
Yeah, and I think that's where most people would have him right now. Is people now have him in the top 3. It's about whether you want to put him above Impact or not, because I think we could still, like, look, he's had a great playoff, but I can't just put him above Alfari now. Alfari smashed everyone the whole season, and Impact had a great season as well. So I think it's tough to put him over Impact, but I think I have no problem with anybody putting him in that conversation of top 2. But he's definitely top 3 at this point. He's looked great. And the last thing I'll say on Fudge was I thought his Gragas actually looked really good. I think he said that he thought Gragas was his worst game of the series. I don't remember
He
if
did. He said his Gragas was the worst game of the series, which I thought was really weird because, in my
he
opinion,
looked great in that one team fight, right? Like, it was so
yeah,
clutch. They were already lost someone. He was the one that turned around what was at that point a 4v5, right?
yeah, I thought that was one of his better games in the series.
Yeah.
I thought his Karma game was the worst game in the series.
It's also like Karma. It's like so I agree, but it's difficult to have a good impact on Karma. But as Sneaky pointed out many times in the co-stream, you need to use your mantra on your E in team fights, not on your Q. He's mantra queuing and doing no damage to like an Udyr on the front line. It's basically useless. And so yeah, I do believe that he wasn't using the Karma to the best that a Karma can be used, but I digress.
It was also weird because he went like a AP-ish sort of build as opposed to your more supportive build with the Moonstone, Staff of Flowing Water. He went like Everfrost,
Yeah.
Zanya's Cosmic Drive, and we even saw in the LEC, you know, Fnatic, when they were running Enchantress top laner, they were also doing the Everfrost build as opposed to your just straight up support build. And I don't know, I don't think there's a big enough sample size to say which one's better, but in that like team comp and situation, I did think that the support build is probably better because it does sort of help out like your Nocturne, your Kaisa, and your Victor to give them the fat shields and the move speed and the healing, as
Yeah.
opposed to your extra damage boost that you get with your Qs by going AP.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the Team Liquid players because I actually thought that Jensen had a pretty good series. I thought that his series against TSM was a little bit lackluster. We mentioned just a few minutes ago how his Victor was kind of troll and he was getting caught out a couple of times, just giving away some of their leads. But I think he straight up won the game for them with the game 3 shockwave, right? There was that one
For
team fight.
sure, yeah.
It was an absolutely huge shockwave that I think C9 was about to wipe them. And Jensen, yeah, I mean, those are the clutch plays that you need to have to win games, and I think he absolutely won them that game. And so, shout out to Jensen for that play. And I thought his TF looked really good. There was one point, which game was the TF?
Game
Game 2,
4.
whichever one the TF one was.
Game 4.
He was
No,
just
game
ulting.
game. Wait, what was it? It was
I don't
game
know.
2. It was game 2. Sorry.
Okay, game 2. He was ulting pretty much on cooldown, finding pick after pick, and alongside with Core JJ. And we always talk about jungler synergy with their support or AD carry synergy with their support. This to me was really good synergy between mid and support, finding pick after pick after pick. And it looked like Cloud9 was about to fall 2-0 in the series, and like yikes, going in, like you need to reverse sweep, right? However, they ended up getting back in that game. But again, I think so much of that lead that TL got was in big part due to Jensen's Twisted Fate and Core JJ on the rel.
Yeah, that game 2 was so crazy because I think Cloud9 is the only team in the league that is looking for fights in the enemy jungle and in the enemy base when they're behind and when like they're chasing from like river. Like
That was very blabber to me. Like that
yeah.
was like Like Blabber is the guy that's like, look, we need a pick. I see someone, I'm gonna run after them. I'm playing Heckram. I'm going to keep going after them over and over and over again. And he did. He found a pick on Core, and that led to a pick on someone else. And then another. Next thing you know, they're in Team Liquid's base, diving past like 2 turrets. They are deep in there, and they ended up turning what was like a 7K lead for Team Liquid into a 3K lead, and Cloud9 climbed back in that game and ultimately won.
Yeah, that game 2 was definitely like the game in terms of like momentum, because you never want to go down 2-0 in a series. And like you just mentioned, Team Liquid is actually doing a lot of great things in that mid game with the Twisted Fate to get a lot of picks. And it did kind of look like at some point that, you know, it was looking like Cloud9 was going to go down 0-2, because, you know, Cloud9 was trying to get themselves back in the game by sending Perks top lane multiple times. And on 2 separate occasions, both Jensen and Core JJ were quickly ready to jump on Perks while he was rotating with that Twisted Fate ultimate. And I think that game 2, it was obviously super crucial, but I think it sort of gave Cloud9 the confidence that, hey, we can and we're going to win this series.
Yeah. Let's talk about tactical a little bit, because me personally, I had a really hard time pinpointing how I would rate his performance over the weekend. What were your thoughts on tactical, if you have any? And then I'll give mine.
I mean, I think he did a really great job for the most part. I think everyone is obviously going to point to his game 4, where he got hit by like, I think 3 Zoe bubbles, and all 3 of those were pretty much like the turning point in team fights. So I think everyone will be quick to just point to that and say he had a shit series. He should be ulting those bubbles, and if he's doing that, Team Liquid wins that game 4 and whatever. But I think for the most part, he had a really solid series. His Xayah in the first game was really great. His Sivir in game 2, while it wasn't anything special, he was doing a great job for the most part, and like avoiding the dive of Cloud9 that they had with the Hecarim and the Malphite. But, you know, at a point, like once those 2 champions just get on top of your face, like there's nothing you can really do about it. And then his Aphelios in game 3 was really, really good. The main thing that was really interesting from that game 3 was that Team Liquid whipped out the Aphelios Thresh, because that bot lane had sort of been dropping in priority, and Thresh had sort of been becoming like a much like higher ban champion. So it was pretty interesting to see them whip out the Aphelios Thresh, and Cloud9 was doing everything that they could in the early game with Blabber to send a lot of pressure bot lane. I think they threw about like 3 or 4 Nocturne ultimates bot lane within the first like 15-20 minutes into the game. Team Liquid pretty much avoided every single gank, with Core JJ like properly stood behind, waiting to Lantern Tactical out while he's shoving the wave. So I thought for the most part, Tactical had a really great series, just minus those like mechanical misplays in game 4.
So I think you and I are on the exact same page here, because I actually thought that he had a good series. But what's going to stand out is those couple of mistakes. The thing is, the few mistakes that he made were just really costly. And so it looks like he had a bad series, but I actually agree with you. I thought he had a good series as well. He did not use the Xayah ulti once he got bubbled by Perks. That's something that people can look to. And don't get me wrong, I actually agree. Like, you need to do something there, because you're just going to get chain CC'd and die, which happened. He didn't spell shield a Malphite ulti when he was playing Sivir. And then, like, those are team fights that you end up losing, and your carry just gets nuked. And it's unfortunate that you can have a mostly very good series, but just a few mistakes can just cost you games, right? And unfortunately, that's what I think happened with Tactical in this series. But for TL fans, I would say I wouldn't worry as much as I would have before, because we saw him pretty much inting, and yes, it's a meme on the Malphite Tristana thing, but we didn't see any, or really any of those moments at all over the weekend of Tactical inting. We had it on our prop sheet about how many times Tactical was going to int, and there was none of those plays that were just like absolute bonehead flashing in or jumping in or any of that stuff. He was actually a very reliable AD. Yeah, there was a few clutch moments that he could have played better, and I think that it's unfortunate. But again, if I'm a Team Liquid fan, I'm not that worried. I think that he had a pretty good series, in both series, actually, pretty good weekend, I would say.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, which I kind of talked about on Hotline League a little bit, was the game 5 and with the lane swap, which was really, really crazy to see Cloud9 whip out.
Oh, cheese, man. And nothing wrong with cheese. Nothing
Well,
wrong with cheese, right?
Here's the thing is,
Oh my God, was that cheesy?
here's the thing why to to be blunt, I don't really give a shit if Team Liquid fans are mad about the cheese, because this is a cheese that like Team Liquid themselves ran not too long ago at Season 9 at Worlds against Damwon. TL pulled out this exact same strat with the Scion taking jungle camps with a lane swap early on into the game. So to be honest, when I look at it from a Team Liquid fan standpoint and they get mad about the lane swap cheese in Game 5, like I can't really like have sympathy for them, because they implemented the same strategy at Worlds in Season 9, and Doublelift even talked about on his co-stream about how much they practice that strategy and how good that strategy actually is if you can, properly implement it and they fit those certain conditions. And I think it was really great in that Game 5. TL basically had no vision of Cloud9's level 1 entirely. They never saw their bot lane plus jungle walk into the Team Liquid blue side jungle. They never saw Scion solo starting blue and Gromp up until it was the last second where CoreJJ placed a late ward over the wall. And you kind of saw like Armeo just got completely starved out of that early game. He only was able to get his 3 camps in his own red side jungle, walked into his blue side jungle, noticed everything was gone, went to go invade Blabber at Blabber's Raptors, couldn't get those Raptors, and then you have to go from there. Like, you can't gank top lane because it's a 2 versus 1. You can't gank mid lane because Perkz is playing the wave so well. The only possible gank lane is bot lane, which is across the map. And you kind of saw like TL get thrown for a loop. They ended up sending CoreJJ to top lane to lane with Alphari, and basically that was like kind of the perfect scenario for Cloud9, because Fudge was just able to sit bot lane and get, play Scion and get tanky. And, that Game 5 was still really, really hectic, but I think that early game by Cloud9 was perfectly, implemented. I don't think there was a lot TL could have done, regardless of if Armeo was in there or Santorin was in there. I think he was kind of screwed either way because of how Cloud9 played it. And it's just so crazy that Cloud9 waited until Game 5 in the finals to actually whip out the strategy.
Yeah, it really is. And again, this is something that people, mostly the consensus is cheese is just part of the game. You came in with a game plan, you executed on it. There's nothing wrong with that. And I know there's a lot of fans that get salty, but where I differ from you a little bit is I actually still do sympathize with Team Liquid fans, because even though I think a Team Liquid fan would say, look, hey, that's a normal strat and like there's nothing wrong with them doing that, it still feels bad where you watch it's a Game 5 and you watch your team just get stomped because they weren't ready for a strat. Like I still do sympathize with that feeling, but hey, fair game's fair game. That's just how the game works. And you got to give props to Cloud9 for prepping for that, going in there and performing. That's really what it came down to. With that said, the game was still more than that. There was a team fight where Team Liquid had gotten 2 kills on Cloud9, and Cloud9 opted into continuing the fight 3v5, and they come out on top. Like, there are some moments in there that have nothing to do with cheese and just have everything to do with clutch moments and being able to pop off when it comes time. And that's what we saw Perkz and Sven do in that one team fight, the 3v5, after they lost 2 of their players. They just completely turned the team fight around. And yeah, again, you got to give props for that.
Yeah, like that whole sequence of events was crazy. Blabber and Vulcan kind of over aggress into the river brush, basically go in, don't do anything, and die. And like you said, Cloud9 opts into a 3v5 team fight where we see a huge outplay from Sven, killing CoreJJ and ulting Tactical backwards to be able to jump out and then get that extra jump after Tactical flashes over the wall. I think that may be another moment that people might point to from Tactical, be like, you played this better, you probably could have won the fight or whatever. But again, we just spoke about it. I think Tactical had a good series. But like you mentioned, like, just very clutch things out of Cloud9 in this Game 5. And it felt like it was kind of like the perfect ending to this series, the way that it played out. Obviously, I'm a bit biased because I'm a Cloud9 fan. But just in terms of like the moment and how it happened, just felt like really, really cool.
And we got to talk about Perkz because he got player of the series, obviously well deserved. And oh my god, like if we compare, it's not the same level as Fudge because Fudge is a new player, right? And Perkz obviously has a huge resume of all these accomplishments. So we did expect him to absolutely pop off. We just didn't know exactly when it was going to happen because let's be honest, he did have a slow start to his LCS career. but I guess it didn't really take too long to find the perks that we know we would eventually see. And people weren't sure if they were going to see it in spring or if they were going to see it in summer. It turns out we saw it in spring, and my God, did he absolutely pop off in this series?
Yeah, I think if you look back at the whole of the midseason showdown, at playoffs is what I'm talking about, Perks was the MVP of playoffs for sure. He really stepped up when it mattered. Everybody, like, when playoffs were coming around, everyone was kind of memeing the whole playoff Perks, thing. Like, were we going to see playoff Perks, or is it going to take a little bit longer, like maybe until summer, like you just mentioned? But Perks played really well in pretty much every single series that Cloud9 was in this playoffs, and it makes me really excited to see that he's kind of getting back to his previous form, and who knows if he can even go higher than that.
Yeah, and the last thing that I want to talk about in this series is something you talked a little bit about on Hotline last night, but the difference of what if Santorin plays this series, right? And ultimately, you and I both came to the conclusion that we don't think the series is much different if Santorin is in. But to play devil's advocate to that, as a Team Liquid fan, you cannot help but wonder, right? You can't
Mm-hmm.
help but wonder, what does that series look like if Santorin is playing? And I do not blame TL fans for that at all. Think about if you were to flip it around for the other side, right? Let's say you can't have Perks or Blabber or just any of them play, and you have to sub in one of C9 Academy's players, and C9 loses that series. Cloud9 fans are going to look at that and say, look, maybe we deserve to lose that series, but what if? And so it sucks because we'll never know is the ultimate answer. You will never know what that series looks like. You can pretend that you're 100% positive that it would have been this and this would have happened, but look, we don't know, guys. Do I believe things would have been different? No, but again, we don't know.
Yeah, what I was worried about was that Team Liquid was going to like lose to TSM, and then TSM was going to get smashed by Cloud9, and then there was just going to be this whole list of what ifs if Santorin was playing. Because let's say, for example, TL lost to TSM in that first match. I think everyone would have probably said that if Santorin was playing, they would have won that series. And then
Yeah.
everyone would have been like, oh, well, Team Liquid is still just as good as Cloud9, even though they lost to them in that previous week. They would have made the proper adjustments, and they could have won that series. But I was at least glad to see that, one, Team Liquid still performed at a high level, and two, Armeo performed at a high level. And I think, like I mentioned, was my sort of idea on Hotline League, or my take, was that I don't think it would have mattered if Santorin was in, or, like, I think Armeo's performance is pretty much exactly what we probably would have gotten from Santorin. It's not like Santorin is like this insane early game jungler that has a huge impact on the game, because he doesn't, at least from his days on Team Liquid so far. He definitely plays around his lane.
I need to hold on though. I would say that his days with FlyQuest would suggest different. And
No,
yes,
I,
I
I
disagree.
said only on his Team Liquid
Yes,
days.
sure, but I just want to say that it's not impossible that that doesn't come back. We saw playoff Perks come back, right? We could have seen some sort of pop off by Santorin. I just want to play devil's advocate
Yeah,
there.
I
But
mean,
sorry to cut you off. Continue.
that's fine. I mean, it's definitely a possibility, but like I also kind of mentioned, like in this meta with Hecarim Udyr, there's not a ton you can be doing. And yes, kind of got countered on Hotline League. Like, yeah, well, Blabber is playing those same champions, but I do also think it's the way that Cloud9 and Blabber specifically plays around his laners and his waves, and his ability to just like recognize when it's time to farm and when it's time to gank. Because I think we do often get into this whole like jungle meta of like full clearing, do nothing. If your lanes have priority, you do Drake or Rift Herald. But Blabber kind of finds that time in between those moments to go and affect lanes, and I think his laners also do a really great job of setting up properly for those ganks.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And like you said, Armeo looked good. Like I'm so like that would have been disaster, right? Is
Yeah.
if Armeo runs it down, that's where you're like, oh my god. And let's be honest, there were a couple of plays that we don't think Santorin would have made, some mistakes. However, it made me feel a little bit better seeing that TL won those games,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if TL loses those games after Armeo makes like a really big mistake, we're all going, okay, that's the difference right there. But at least, and thank God, I might not make a TL fan feel better, but I mean, still, thank God that those mistakes happened in games that they ended up winning anyways, so that people aren't just going to point the finger at Armeo. Like it's such a shit scenario for him because he hasn't played with the team all split long and hasn't had that much time to practice, and then you're put up in against the best team in the league in finals. So yeah, it feels bad. I will say huge hats off to Armeo though, because yeah, that's not an easy thing to do, to sub into that kind of situation. And I know that's been said a million times, but it's something we have to acknowledge.
Yeah, one thing just to kind of close out this Armeo point that I wonder is if Team Liquid, over the course of this offseason, thinks that Armeo deserves some chance with the main roster, whether that be splitting scrims with Santorin, whether that be, if Santorin doesn't recover, immediately or has to take some extra time off, if they introduce Armeo to the roster a little bit more. Because at least with Armeo, it always feels like he's always caught in this situation with whatever team he's on in terms of his jungle position and jungle role. Because from his days on TSM, he was, splitting time with Acadian. When he was on Dignitas, he was splitting time with Acadian. And it kind of feels like Armeo is always caught in these situations. So I wonder if Team Liquid is going to give him a chance, or if Santorin fully recovers and everything, they're just going to go right back to him. That's what I would expect to happen. But
Right.
if there might be like any complications, or Santorin, needs to take any extra time off, or chooses to take any extra time off just to make sure that he's 100% for summer, we'll have to see.
Yeah, you would. I have full expectation that Santorin's the guy they're going to continue to go with. I don't see any reason to all of a sudden change, unless, like we say, his health issues get worse. Which, I mean, let's hope not. I mean, that's another thing too. Is a lot of people feel bad for Armeo. I feel bad for Santorin. That sucks. He wants to play.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't he? And obviously, he's dealing with some health issues. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to say. Get better, forehead. It sucks. But anyways, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on for this series specifically?
No, we can go pop off bean soup.
Okay, but before we do that, I did want to shout out. We did get a sub earlier. I didn't want to interrupt the conversation of the Cloud9 thing. So huge shout out to Vapire for gifting a sub to Borbo. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's do the awards. Pop off, bean soup, pick one, and go.
Kind of an underrated, more like, I mean, I don't know. I think he popped off, but I don't think he was like the person that you would like immediately choose. But I went with Vulcan for
Okay.
pop off, because I thought his engages were really, really good. Just the majority of in the games this weekend, and even in their 2 losses. I think in both of the losses that Cloud9 had, Vulcan was still doing a really great job, keeping Cloud9 in it with his team fighting. Was pretty surprised to see him even get his hands on Alistar in this series, because I think that is his best champion. It just always feels like whoever is playing support for Cloud9 is really good at Alistar. You think back to the early days of Smoothie on Cloud9, his Alistar was insane. You think of Zeyzal on Cloud9 in Season 8,
True.
his Alistar was insane, and Vulcan is just like next in line for, supports on Cloud9 who have a really insane Alistar. And like I said, thought his engages were really, really great this weekend. Even in their losses in games 1 and 3, I think he was doing a great job, team fighting overall. And I just thought Vulcan deserves some love, because I think the majority of it is going to go to other players, rightfully so. But I think Vulcan quietly had a really great series.
Yeah, I think so too. I think all of C9 had a good series, and so I agree. But I obviously I had to go with Perks. How can you not? Like, obviously one of us has to go with Perks here, guys. Yeah, I'm not going to say everything I said before. The guy had an amazing series. You could put him on anything and know he's going to perform in playoffs, and that's what we saw. So pop off Perks. What a big surprise. Bean Soup, who disappointed you? Who hurt you, JNT?
The broadcast with the pause.
Ugh. Yeah.
We don't like, nobody likes pauses. They suck. They just take the wind out of like the momentum of the series.
I will say it didn't feel that way this time around, though. I think that speaks to how good the series was. But to your point, that just kills a series, man.
Yeah.
It
The thing that was dumb, and we kind of talked about this, earlier, was that the initial pause was because there was like a bit of sunlight coming in from the whole like thing that was on Tactical Screen, and that was the reason why they paused. And it just was weird to me that they didn't have like a quick fix. Like they put up like something just like even like a t-shirt in that little corner just to prevent the sun from coming in. It sucked. Bean soup.
Vapire in a live chat. JNT gives his Bean Soup award to the sun. Okay.
Yeah, dude.
Deserved. All right. Bean Soup, I think a lot of you guys know where I'm going. I went with TSM. because oh my god, they actually started off playoffs looking pretty good. Yes, I know they lost their series to TL the first time around, but I still thought they looked good in that series. And then they looked like shit every series since. They actually do nothing, and that to me blows my mind. Where you have a team full of veterans. You've got Hooney, you've got Power of Evil, Sword Art. Like one of these guys has to be able to make some calls and do something. And well, they're doing nothing. So I'm done harping on TSM. I will say, I still do feel for the players because I know they put in a lot of time. I know they're grinding all the time to try and get better, but it doesn't leave me any less disappointed when I see them just flop and kind of look awful. So TSM Bean Soup. Hopefully, we see them look better in summer. What's next, JT?
Um, we got quick news next. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to talk about before we move into that.
No, I think that's about it. Let's get into quick news.
Yeah, Bean Soup, Texas Internet. I actually
true.
agree.
Yeah. Okay. Take it all back.
Yeah,
Bean Soup,
I take
Texas
it back.
Internet.
We got
Go
a little
ahead.
bit of quick news. Some LCS related, others not. First up, Valkyrae and Courage, two content creators from 100 Thieves, are apparently now co-owners of 100 Thieves.
Yeah, and this is relevant because it's like, what kind of impact is this going to have on the LCS squad? There's a good chance there's no impact, but I'm a firm believer that a lot of the times when there's a change in ownership or anything like that, mind you, we don't know how big of a piece of the pie they got. I imagine it's not that big. I imagine 100 Thieves isn't just giving up a bunch of their equity, but I digress. The point is, this could have an effect on the LCS team. What that's going to be, if that's going to be anything, I don't know, but I guess that's something we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I don't know. Good for them, I guess.
Yeah, it's cool.
Next up, apparently it was sort of announced like a few days ago that the old Cloud9 roster, minus Lemonation and adding in Doublelift, is going to be playing in Tyler One's Money Match tournament.
This is just the next meme team. That's all. I mean, it's old Cloud9, and they replaced Lemonation with Doublelift. But I mean, this is like just a funny fucking roster, man.
Yeah.
That it's the new meme dream team. What the hell was the name of like the team with Dyrus and
It was like the
Skara?
meme team dreams team or something like that.
Stream, yeah,
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, that was like the old roster with like Dyrus, I'm a Cutie Pie, Skara, Shifter, and who was the last person? I don't remember.
I don't know. It's Delta Fox though,
Yeah,
right?
Delta
That was
Fox.
Yeah, that was some funny shit. So I don't know. I guess that's something to pay attention to because, well, pretty much anytime Tyler One does a tournament, there's a lot of eyeballs that are drawn to it.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it's a Tyler One tournament and this roster. Like, how can you not want to watch?
Yeah, they did announce, I think it was yesterday, that apparently they're like going to be streaming their scrims or whatever tomorrow. So there'll probably be some good content with that.
I'll have to look for the YouTube content for this one.
Yeah,
because I
that'll
don't
be
know. I
good.
don't even know when the hell it is, but I'm sure it'll pop up in my feed at some point.
I
I'll
know
have
that
to watch
I
it.
know that Doublelift has like dubbed himself the best blitzcrank in the world, and he's playing support in this lineup, so
Beauty.
it should be interesting. It should be fun.
Yep. Okay, what's next?
Some kind of late sponsorship news. Apparently, Rawcat is now the official mouse and keyboard sponsor of the LCS.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. So, first of all, the LCS has like a bunch of sponsors all of a sudden. I don't know what that's all about, but my God, they had a bunch of them come in just towards the end of the season. This one is interesting to me though because it's their mouse and keyboard sponsor, like you say. So, what does that mean? Like, do all the players have to use this stuff now?
I don't think
Because
so.
it wouldn't make sense, right? Because there's
Yeah.
teams that have sponsors of other peripheral companies like
Mm-hmm.
TSM has Logitech, and I think Evil Geniuses has Razer, and there's a bunch of teams with a bunch of different sponsors. So I hope it doesn't work that way. The only reason why I wonder that is because at Worlds this past year, when there was a Bose sponsorship, everyone had to wear those stupid Bose headsets, and those things were garbage. You remember the microphone was sitting in front of their face, like it was literally shake. Like I don't know how you could focus on the game
Yeah.
with a microphone waving in front of your face the whole time. So, anyways, that's why I wonder that. I hope that's not the case. I hope people can use whatever they're comfortable with. But again, I digress.
Yeah, it's weird because like if people don't remember or you're not like an OG, like Rawcat was a team in the EU LCS back in the day. And that was like kind of where Yankos got his like start and became like, a very popular player. So it's just kind of weird how They used to be in the EULCS, are now no longer, and now they're like a sponsor in the LCS. So
I can just picture. I don't remember the announcers, but you know which announcer I'm talking about. Um, there was those two guys. They ended up going to FIFA for whatever
Joe and
reason. But
D-Man, those guys.
those guys were great, man.
yeah.
They were fantastic, and yeah, rip.
Yeah.
FIFA, Dan's game. Ugh. Anyways, next.
The summer split starts on June the 4th. Pretty quickly after MSI. MSI concludes on the 23rd, May the 23rd. Summer split starts on June the 4th. I thought normally the summer split starts a bit later, but I guess they have to back up the start of summer split because the way that the schedule's changed now, and they're doing 9 weeks of summer with 3 days of gameplay a week. So it sounds like we're in for a summer full of LCS.
So wait though. So when did it start last year? Do you know?
When did what start last year?
Summer split.
I don't know, but from what I remember, it normally just starts a little bit later, doesn't it?
I don't know, but what I do know is that like it's around like 1 year for CFP. We've almost been doing this for 1 year because we started at the very start of CFP last year. And I thought that we did one episode in May, like very late May before the start of LCS. I don't really know that for sure. But anyways, yeah, we're almost on 1 year of CFP. And so that's why this is significant to you and I. It's like, wow, holy crap. We've
Summer
almost been doing
split
this
started last year on June the 12th.
Okay.
We uploaded our first episode on June the 8th.
Ah, okay.
We'll have to do a little 1 year anniversary thing.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but sure. What's next?
Oh, that's it.
Oh, that's everything. Oh no, hold on. We prop sheet.
Well, that's what I meant for quick news. Like,
okay, my mistake. Anyways, so some of you guys might not know this, but last week we did a prop sheet for the finals, and we had quite a few people participate. So that was hella fun. I think it's something that we're going to want to do again in the future. I think it was lots of fun. We do have the winners. We are announcing right now that the winner is Charlie ZMB92. He got 22 points out of a possible 29.5. And we have to give an honorable mention to NA's finest, who had 21.5 points. He fell half a point behind. Unlucky for him. But yeah, thanks to everyone who participated. I think it was a lot of fun. We're going to try and make it a little bit better next time because we did realize there was a couple things that we could have done better, such as, well, once you submitted your results, you couldn't even look at what you submitted. So
yeah, well,
that was
admittedly, we were kind of doing it a bit on the fly when we were streaming it last Tuesday, but definitely something that we really enjoyed making. It's good to see that, you know, even like it wasn't a ton of people, but a lot of people just like came out, filled it out, came to support. Like, that's really cool. Definitely, as Blue Jay says, something we're probably going to do in the future, whether that's like MSI finals or like Worlds finals or even just NA finals in general. Seems like a fun thing to do at the culmination of like the end of the season or end of a split or something like that. So we'll probably do these in the future. They're a lot of fun.
There was clearly enough interest to want to do it again. So we'll do it again, and we'll try to do it a little bit better if we can. But yeah, huge shout out to Charlie for winning. We will reach out to you on Twitch soon. I don't know exactly when, but we will get to that soon. I promise you we won't stiff you, and you'll get your $50 in RP or an Amazon gift card, and we'll make sure that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, JNT?
No, that's it.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for putting up with our double day broadcast. It's really out of our control. We had some internet issues.
Texas internet, omega lol.
What can we do there? But thank you guys so much for all the support. We had lots of people in live chat. Shout out to all the boys in live chat. Let's go, guys. And yeah, thank you everyone that's been listening on YouTube and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and the whole thing. Our Twitters are on screen. I think it's been a little while since we've shouted out our Twitters. If you want to follow us on Twitter. It's usually LCS related, and we give you guys some updates about CFP episodes and whatnot. So be sure to check us out on Twitter, and there's also Discord in the description.
One thing really quickly.
Everywhere.
Because
Go ahead.
I always forget this every week, but
What's up?
To correct the prediction records now that the split is over.
Oh.
I had them wrong last week because I was kind of doing it on the fly, and I accidentally made a typo. But they're fixed now. These are the correct records after lock-in, spring split, and spring playoffs. I'm up 2 on you. I don't know if we're going to save this record and then like start a new one for Summer Split, or if we'll just continue it the whole way. But yeah, there you
Gotta
go.
give props to JNT. JNT got the best of me this time around. I don't know if we want to restart or not, because I do think like it's fun to have two different ones, but it's also like I think it's fun to carry over. We'll have to figure out how we want to do that. Maybe we could do both. Maybe we can have a U1 spring and we can carry over. I don't know. We'll figure that out. But yeah, huge shout out to you. And while you're flexing, I have to flex on you back because I did actually get the best of JNT in our prop sheet. We
You
tied,
won on the tiebreaker, man.
but I got the tiebreaker, baby. Woo! So,
That's some bullshit.
oh, maybe you could get me in the next one when we do one for summer. But that's going to be it for this episode. Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate you all. This has been episode 37 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. See you guys next week.